Let's talk now about the treatment aspects, which is really what Harry had to go through in an attempt to either reduce his symptoms, which is the burden of cancer, or aiming for cure.
Mm-hmm.
Did they say to you at that stage that they were aiming for a cure, or wasn't it as clear as that?
Wasn't as clear as that, or certainly from memory it didn't feel as clear as that. It was about reducing Harry's tumour, and the only way to do it, because Harry had just turned 7, at that time it wasn't possible and viable for him to have radiotherapy because of the effects on the good parts of the brain. So the only option for Harry was chemo. And that had to be intensive chemotherapy. And I always remember it because Harry used to talk about it in his speeches: vincristine, carboplatin and etoposide.
That's what I remember.
Yeah.
These names are horribly complicated.
And I think because Harry used to burst into the hospital and say, what am I having now, you know? But he had to go and have surgery again and have a wiggly put in into his chest. And then his treatment could finally start, because as a parent, we just said, whatever we've got to face, we're going to get through it. It's going to be hard, whether it's surgery, whether it's chemotherapy, but we'll get through it, and there's going to be light at the end of the tunnel. There's going to be closure, there's going to be an end to it. You know, for us, little did we know, but and we were all really, really close, and we were just so relieved that, because we were, as soon as they administered the first dose through, obviously through the intravenously, through his line. For us, we just thought, this is it, we're on our way.
Yes, you could see that there was something to get hold of.
Absolutely.
A treatment was being given, and for you that was like, this is the real progress now. All the rest had been investigations, diagnosis. That gets you to the point telling you what's wrong. But you're talking now about the treatment correcting.
And it felt a bit of like a sigh of relief. It's just like, you know, here we go. This is going to make Harry better, you know, and we knew that what he was about to face was not going to be nice for Harry. It was going to make him poorly.
Do you mean the
to make him
chemotherapy
better.
side effects? Those kind of things,
but for us, we just knew that we'd get through it. So Harry started his chemo 3 days a week. Ended up in hospital a lot. He was neutropenic quite a bit, and that for Harry was the most frustrating time, I think, because even when he didn't feel poorly, obviously if his temperature peaked, it was straight into hospital and in for at least 48 hours to be on a antibiotic drip to clear any infection that he'd got. So but it's from that moment that our life suddenly changed. Routine had gone. The family that we were, that family of 5, was just broken, really, because there was me with Harry at hospital all the time, and obviously Harry's brother and sister at home, dad, to and fro.
Because in a way, there's a transition between a totally normal family undergoing a lot of intensive investigations, but hanging on to that normality, and the relationship still being preserved. And then for at least, definitely for Harry, but for you as well, and others who may be involved, it being much more illness or hospital driven. Do you know what I mean? Where the priority is being on the ward, the priority is having the treatment. And that causes all that stress about maintaining that normal life, but the family dynamics can be affected by it.
Absolutely, you know, and for Harry, you know, if it was, God forbid, but obviously if it was any of my children, the same would have happened, you know. It would, as Harry's mum, not that his dad was any less important, but I had to be there. So, you know, I suddenly went home one night and said, I'm going to have to not go to work, you know. That in itself, our income reduced by 70% a year.
So up to that moment, you were hanging on to your job.
Because we just didn't know. And you know, my employer was really supportive, but I've just felt, I don't know how long this is going to be going on for, and I couldn't take advantage, you know. So I resigned, you know, and left to focus on my family, you know. And my husband became mum and dad at home. And you know, my other children, it impacted on them massively, because of an evening, it was after I'd finished work, I'd collect them from the childminders, and then we'd go home and we'd have dinner together, and suddenly mum, they hadn't just lost Harry and Harry was poorly, they'd lost their mum too.
That's very powerful. In terms of the dynamics in the family.
That's sort of, you know, that's had a massive impact on me as well, as to what it does to the other people, not just the ill person, but the immediate family unit that's around, you know. It affects everything.
And what period of time was that, from when Harry started to have that first chemotherapy? And was there ever a big break from that, where things seemed to go okay for a while?
Yes, there was. I mean, for Harry, it was a bit of a different story. He had his chemotherapy. He started it in the April, and then I think it was the mid-June time they had to stop it, because Harry was a very average built boy for his age, at the age of 7. And then when he went on his chemo, he lost his hair, he lost an awful lot of weight, and he became very, very weak. Ended up in a wheelchair, you know, couldn't walk long, he was just tired all the time. And at that point, I actually thought, he's so poorly, we could lose him. Although he was cheery, he'd always go into the oncology clinic for his treatments, and like, this is my hospital, L1062-619, and I'm going to have, you know, I'm having vincristine first, and he'd reel off the name of his tumour, and the nurses just adored him, because he was curious, what's that, what are you giving me, what are you doing, you know? And he kept us positive, definitely.
So he kept his personality through his illnesses.
Absolutely, and he so helped me through, and I just thought, for him to be going, I'm not going through this, all I can do, you know, you feel so helpless as a parent to watch your child going through something and you can't do anything, and you rely on the medical professions, you know, it's all out of your hands, and it's the biggest sense of failure that I felt as a mum, because you're obviously, and as how I think I can speak for Harry's dad, you know, as a parent, you're there to love and protect your kids, and when it's taken away from you and you're not in control of that, it's really horrid, you know. But Harry finished in the June because his body became full of toxins. He needed a break. During that period, he had an MRI scan in the July. He was having scans every 3 months to see if the chemotherapy was working. First one showed that it had shrunk a tiny little bit. The second scan showed that actually his tumour had increased in size, so it wasn't working. So they stopped his chemotherapy, and then we had to wait again. Obviously, they had to have a Friday meeting where the oncologists got with the neurosurgeons and the radiologists, and it's a big meeting. Yeah, absolutely. To decide and discuss Harry's case and look at his scan and decide the next way forward. And then they said, because Harry was on the borderline, it was about 4 months before his 8th birthday, that they were going to give him radio. In between that, he was on steroids, which was quite a comical time, because I always remember lots of little sausages going missing out the fridge.
He drove his appetite, did it?
Absolutely. And Harry had gone, you know, I think visually, Harry was so confident, and as often as he could go to school, cancer didn't bother him, his hair didn't bother him, the way he looked, how tired he was, he just got on with it, and he just smiled all the way through. But when I think he struggled visually, from going from an average built boy to going so painfully thin, to then going to the other extreme, and also because of where his tumour was located, it was affecting all his growth hormones. Yes, he was just putting on so much weight, and that he found hard as a little boy. And also because by this time, once his hair had started coming back and his colour after the chemo had stopped, you know, he'd have people comment at school and pick on him because of his weight, you know, and as a parent, it's, but you don't know, and you know, and I'd always taught my children never to judge a person based on look, because you never know what's going on and what's caused that, and you know. So the school and the other kids knew, did they? You were mentioning earlier about telling them, I think. Yes, and the easiest way to say, like we said to the children, once we knew Harry's got a lump in his head, in his brain, that shouldn't be there, it's right in the middle, and doctors can't get to it because it's so deep, and it's a type of cancer. You know? And yet he tried to maintain, you know, school life as often as he could. Yes, he did. He did have, when he was quite weak, a school that was assigned to the hospital that would come home and see to him, especially when he was on radiotherapy because he got very tired.
Yeah. Was that successful? Was he able to maintain any of his concentration and studies outside of school? Because I know you also lose there's a danger of losing your friends as well because you have that connection at school, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think everybody just doesn't know, everybody puts you a big roll of cotton wool around you, and for us, we were trying to carry on when we weren't in hospital and Harry wasn't having his chemo to have as much normality as a family as possible. Harry still got told off if he did wrong, it wasn't suddenly. And we tried to ensure that family members, remember there's 3 children here, not just Harry. But there's areas that you just can't control that it impacts on, and people change, their attitude, the way they come across. And we had family members come into the house straight over to Harry first, before Louis and Danny. And it wouldn't perhaps have been like that before. And I think you just become more conscious and aware of everything that goes on as a result of cancer.